When I was a little kid, my dad gave me a dog-eared old paperback copy of some Isaac Asimov science essays, and reading this book totally changed how I saw the world. There was astronomy, physics, chemistry. It was all awe-inspiring, and the crazy thing was, all the explanations made sense to me, even though I knew I was reading a book that was meant for adults. So, as a little kid, I was pretty unathletic. I couldn't run very fast. Being able to throw like a girl would have been a big step up for me. So I thought maybe science could be my thing. And in fact, since I was starting so early, I didn't see any reason why I couldn't be the world's greatest scientist. I had ambitions of possibly inventing the first working time machine, or maybe a teleportation ray I could use to send my brother to Siberia if he touched my Halloween candy again. So my first chance to show off my scientific chops came in 6th grade for the 6th grade science fair. My parents at the time were having kind of a pest problem in our townhouse. We had kind of a bad cockroach problem, which in a way wasn't surprising because my parents had 2 young boys, and boys are disgusting, and we're in and out of the house all the time and leaving food everywhere. They had 2 dogs. Dogs, as you know, are disgusting. We had a cat, and somehow we had gotten the world's only cat that didn't like to clean itself. So my parents had a hard time, keeping things under control in the house, and they also were concerned about our health, so they didn't like using chemicals. So they were trying to control this problem with roach motels. If you don't remember roach motels, it is the accommodation that gets 0 stars on TripAdvisor from all tourists with 6 legs. It's like a little box, and it's filled with glue strips inside, and the bugs go in, and they don't come out. And I actually found this very interesting. We had dogs in the house, we had the cat in the house. To me, as this little boy, these were just more animals that lived in the house, and I found them very interesting. And actually in 5th grade, I did a research paper on cockroaches, which, since my mother typed it for me after I'd handwritten it, she made sure there was no mention of my field observations in the paper. It was all about the National Geographic articles I'd read and research I'd done in the library. So by 6th grade, I had this thought that I could help out my parents with this problem. I had formed a theory that the roach motels didn't work as well as they could because they smelled bad. Because to me, they didn't smell very appealing. They had this black goop inside that was supposed to be bait, that was supposed to smell good to the roaches, but to me, it made sense that the roaches would find the roach motels more appealing if they smelled like people food, because everything I had read is they loved people food. So I formed this theory that they would work better if they were baited with food and not this brown goop. And so I begged my parents to buy me boxes and boxes and boxes of roach motels, and I picked out about 20 different foods to test. And I placed different foods in all these different roach motels and scattered them around the house, and I waited. And every day I would check the traps, and I graduated from holding them up and looking at them, looking at the light through them like they were one of those kid kaleidoscope things, which I used to do in the beginning because it was interesting to see was the roach dead, were the antennas still going around. So I would check the traps every day and do a count. And I did this for a couple months, testing with different foods. And when the science fair rolled around, I put out my display, which I had spent a week lovingly making this display. And it was covered with color photographs of the traps opened up, covered with dead bugs. And I had my journal, my log book of catch counts for each trap, dated and with a time, and a hand-drawn map of my parents' house with all the trap locations marked in green highlighter. So, for some reason, my 6th grade teacher wasn't as impressed with my work as I was, and top honors at the science fair went to a kid who brought in a baking soda and vinegar volcano. Yeah, I know. But the upside is my parents won unofficial prize for most embarrassing child. I got nothing. So 7th grade was kind of a bad year for me, but my chance to redeem myself came in 8th grade. When the 8th grade science fair came around, I was determined to win a prize. And this time, I planned well in advance. I had what I thought was a really good project picked out. I had picked out a good but simple experiment. I was going to try and determine the oxygen content of air. So I spent several weeks on it. I did a bunch of trials, and every time I did a trial, I came up with 20% oxygen in the air, which is actually the right answer. My science teacher in 8th grade was so impressed with this project that she recommended me to go to the Northern Virginia Regional Science Fair. In the Northern Virginia Regional Science Fair, I was very honored to go, but I found it very intimidating. My little display was just a tiny speck in this gigantic sea of 3-panel foam core and nearsighted geniuses. And I took a few breaks during the fair, which was all day long, to walk around and see what other kids had done. And the more I walked around, the worse I felt about myself, the more uncreative I felt, because there was I remember one kid had a project where he had a working demonstration of a machine that generated electricity from the motion of ocean waves. And there was another girl who had submitted a paper on quantum mechanics. So I felt pretty bad by the time I went back to my table and I waited for the judges to appear. And it took hours for them to get there because they had to go around and talk to everyone individually. And I felt more and more nervous every minute. By the time they got to me, I was convinced they were going to walk right up and say, "You have no business touching test tubes, go home." They finally got there, and it's a three-person panel of judges, 2 high school science teachers and an actual working scientist. And they quizzed me about my project for a few minutes while I'm just trying not to faint from nerves. And eventually, one of the high school science teachers just, got his arms crossed, and he's like, "Well, you didn't apply Boyle's law to your calculations, so I think your results just aren't reliable." And then he just walked away. And I was like, "Boyle's law? What an idiot. I don't even know what Boyle's law is, but I must be some kind of moron for taking that into account." In case you're wondering, it's the relationship between temperature and volume of a gas. So I didn't take into account, I didn't measure the temperature of the air around my test apparatus to see if that was going to change my results. So I got criticized for that. My 12-year-old heart was crushed, and I was convinced I had failed. So no one was more surprised than me at the end of the day when they announced the results, and I received an honorable mention from the Northern Virginia Regional Science Fair for my experiment. Thank you. I got a certificate and a little pin, and I was sure I was on my way to that Nobel Prize. So my next chance, I enjoyed the honorable mention, but I wanted a real prize. My next chance was 11th grade, the 11th grade science fair. My buddy Teek and I had been really inspired by our physics teacher at South Lakes. We really wanted to do a good job on this project. We were searching for project ideas, and we read about this project someone had done where they had used an FM stereo receiver to build a homemade radio telescope. And this was just the inspiration we were looking for. We thought we could definitely do this project. So we already had an old stereo, so all we needed was to build a big, and I mean really big, electrified antenna to pick up the radio waves from the sun. So we sketched out designs, tried to figure out what we needed to build this thing. We borrowed, by which I mean stole, a whole bunch of wood from my dad's handyman supply so we could build this big wooden frame. It's like a long pole with lots of cross pieces, and we're gonna wrap wire around it to make a big coil that will catch the radio signals and amplify them. So, we bult the frame, we spent hours bending coat hangers into giant loops until our hands were blistered. We got batteries. We got the biggest transformer we could get our hands on to try and step up the battery to a higher voltage so it could amplify the signal. By the time we were done building this thing, it was about 14 feet long, incredibly delicate, and it took both of us to pick it up and carry it outside. So we take it outside for the first trial run, and Teek's holding it, and he's holding the wires that'll connect the antenna to the battery, and I'm hooking up the battery to the transformer, and both of us are watching the stereo dial on the stereo and not looking at what we're holding. And as soon as I touch the battery contacts, there's a big spark, and Teek lets out this noise. And falls backwards and drops the big antenna on his lawn, and the loops bend a little bit, and then I'm like, are you okay, are you okay? And he is just staring up at the sky for a minute or two, and finally he blinks, and he sits up, and even though I have just tasered my science partner with our homemade radio telescope, we have a deadline, so we have to get back to work. So he is standing in his parents' yard, waving this 14-foot long plywood and coat hanger antenna back and forth across the sky, and I'm working the dial on the stereo, expecting at any minute to hear the crackle of the radio signal from the sun. And strangely, it is silent everywhere. Like, there is nothing on the stereo, except for one spot. There's one spot where there is a deafeningly loud signal that comes out of the stereo, and that spot is WMZQ country music. So the two junior scientists realize we have just spent the last several weeks building the world's largest Garth Brooks detector. But unfortunately, it is 2 days before the science fair, so there's nothing really we can do other than make our presentation board, take a bunch of photos of our equipment, explain what we've done, and hope that the judges appreciate the value of an educational failure. So we go to the science fair and we set up our display, and we're waiting there for the judges, and we see down the row from us 2 guys show up and put up their display, and they have brought a big jar of liquid nitrogen. And the judges get around to them, and the guys with the liquid nitrogen start freezing flowers and smashing them while the judges ooh and ah, and then they freeze some more stuff and smash it while the judges applaud, and we get no prize. So in the end, I never got a blue ribbon, and I never got a Nobel Prize, and I, to this day, have not invented a time machine. But if I ever get that done, I'm going back to 6th grade, and I'm giving my younger self a baking soda and vinegar volcano.